Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time. You can see my patriarchy card authorizing me on talking about all the issues from the feminist movement and with all its tentacles spread around the world. Today's topic is the Great Purge. Anyone who has any connection to the internet must have seen the kinds of purgings and cancellations of accounts and deleting of persons, the basic unpersoning of everyone on the right. So, with no further ado, I'm going to get straight into it, with first talking about a few, oops, I've got a little bit of a thing to close down here. 1 second, bear with me. And I'm going to start off with touching on a few things here to kind of give us a sense of where we're at with this. Here, a tweet I captured per CNN. Read with me from the top. I'll expand it out for you. Investigators believe riot at Capitol was planned, not inspired by President Donald Trump, but Democrats impeached before they had any information from investigators. So this is one of the biggest stories of our day. Trump has basically been unpersoned on multiple platforms around the world, including a bank in Germany, Facebook and Twitter. We'll get to that shortly. But CNN, the great propagandists for the left, which is CNN, complete propagandists, they were right on the ball, pretty much the same day or the next day, promoting this as a Trump-incited insurrection. And there's a lot of new information coming out that looks really bad on CNN, the Democrats, and the entire left movement. So let's get into some more tweets around this. Well, here's CNN Politics. The date, this is the day after Trump's speech and that so-called insurrection on the Capitol. January 7th, in CNN, Trump's presidency ends with American carnage. Let's carry on. Reading this from the top with me, this is from that same article, and again, all of the links are in the descriptions of the video. 3 years, 11 months, 17 days after President Donald Trump warned from the West Front of the U.S. Capitol that, quote, American carnage stops right here. The very spot he stood was engulfed by his own protesters. Okay, this is the day after. How they knew this, we don't know. They won't say. They are crafting a narrative for mass consumption, to justify their future goals. By his own protesters bringing carnage of their own. It was a stunning scene Trump encouraged hours before and refused to condemn afterward. It left one woman dead, sent members of Congress ducking for cover, and forced evacuations after pipe bombs were discovered in nearby office buildings. Let's read on. This is CNN's immediate coverage. Now, again, CNN, January 14th. House impeaches Trump for incitement of insurrection. This is 8 days after Trump's speech. Lots of time for investigation, lots of time to study his actual speech, the speech which is available in written form online several days ago, days before they decided to print this article with the headline, Incitement of Insurrection. And of course, the Democrat Party wasted no time pushing forward the impeachment. There's ulterior motives for this. And here I tweeted this out January 13th, and the speech had already been available online for a little while before I tweeted this out. I read the entire speech. I'm going to read my tweet here. Read with me from the top. It's a long speech. And it's Trump's style of talking, translated into text form, is not particularly easy. He does dart around with his ideas and jumps back and forth between previous ideas and ideas he's getting to. It's a bit disorganized, but I read the whole thing, and it's quite long. This is what he urges his supporters to do. This is the line that they say is Trump encouraging insurrection. They're quoted right from the text of that speech, and you can read it yourself. It's early on, about probably a quarter of the way into his speech. Quote, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." That doesn't sound like inciting insurrection to me, not in the slightest. At no point does he encourage an insurrection. Democrats and mainstream media are liars. And this came to my attention through Jordan Peterson, who indicated that the full speech was in fact available online. Thank you so much, Sean, for your generous contribution to Studio Relay. We need all of your support we can get, as our funding has been undermined by all of the traditional funding sources, and it seems to be going further and further in that direction. Sean says, they should be choking on the hypocrisy. I have almost entirely stopped listening to mainstream media entirely, as the lies are nonstop. And I am fully on board with what you're saying, Sean. I do pay attention to the mainstream media only to be up to date on the current state of their manipulation and lies of the general public, because revealing their lies is probably the only thing I can do about this situation, other than protect myself. Let's read onwards. The next slide here. And this I quoted out shortly after that. It increasingly looks like the Capitol insurrection was a false flag, attack orchestrated by the left, probably to justify the full unpersoning and second impeachment of Trump. And this is in response to this tweet here, which I'll just read for you. Another violent leftist arrested at the U.S. Capitol, registered Democrat and 34-year-old son of a New York judge, via Great Pundit. We'll have a look at this right now. So in other words, as time goes on, it's turning out that a lot of these so-called insurrectionists are leftist Democrats, Antifa, the same Antifa BLM crowd we've been seeing causing terrible riots and damage and violence right across the U.S. for the past year. Here he is. This is the original tweet. Another violent leftist arrested at the U.S. Capitol protest, registered Democrat, the son of a New York judge, and here he is right here. You're welcome to go and read that article, and it's not the only one of its kind. Here, Rahim Kassam pointed out, I want everybody to think about the fact that this is the guy they say led a coup attempt for Donald Trump on Capitol Hill. Does he look in any way like, one, a person who could lead a coup attempt? Well, that's beside the point. But does he look any way like a right-wing so-called patriot that they are blaming this on? I can't imagine the people characterized as right-wing and patriot dressing up like this. And it's almost comical to think that they're going into the Capitol as an insurrection like this. But in any case, let's carry on. Here, read from the top. Twitter insider secretly records CEO Jack, that's Jack Dorsey, owner of CEO of Twitter, detailing agenda for further political censorship. This has been prepared well in advance at Twitter. They had planned this. And here is a quote from the secretly recorded video, which you can see at this very same tweet on Twitter. It's still alive. Last time I looked. We are focused on one account at Real Donald Trump right now, but this is going to be much bigger than just one account, and it's going to go on for much longer. He's referring to the purge, the unpersoning of everyone that the left sees as not in their camp. Of course, they're starting with the big fish, but it's quickly spreading far outside that, as we shall soon see. Reading from the top with me. Breaking. This came out, I think, yesterday. This is quite significant. Of course, CNN and the group of mainstream media are going to try and bury this deeply, just like they buried that story from New York Post on Hunter Biden during the election. They're going to try and bury this story until all of this is out of the news cycle. But here is the truth of it. CNN's own employee, Jade Sacker, penetrating the Capitol with a member of BLM Antifa cheering, "We did it," and then asking her co-conspirator if he was filming. He said he'd delete it later, I guess. He lied. CNN was in on it. This is incontrovertible proof. This is incontrovertible proof that this was a false flag operation coming from the very top. CNN, of course, is controlled by the super elite leftists, and this is their plan. This so-called attack on the Capitol had the entire purpose of whipping up public support for unpersoning Donald Trump and spreading that unpersoning to you and me and anyone who has not been vocally against Trump. This is the purge that Jack Dorsey was talking about in that video, and I highly recommend you have a look at that video, the original. Maybe somebody can archive it too, because it's likely to get purged off of Twitter before you know it. I watched it. Here's my tweet in response to that. This is proof that the Capitol insurrection was a false flag operation. There's no running away from this. And here, this is from @Amuse. To make this clear, this is referring to the same incident, CNN was embedded with BLM Antifa pretending to be Trump supporters, videoing them incite a riot. The CNN employee there, I'm just talking right now to make a comment. The CNN employee was concerned that he was still videotaping her excitement at they saying, "We have won." In other words, we, Antifa, BLM, and CNN, the leaders of this, the insiders, the true insiders, have won. This is freaking huge. She asked her, of course, he was concerned that if she wanted him to delete that video later, but somehow it got out. Maybe the guy videoing had pangs of conscience, or maybe he wanted to become famous for blowing the lid off of this conspiracy. Of course, I'm a conspiracy theorist for just pointing out what is actually happening and with proof. CNN will spin this as we being conspiracy theorists. Reading the rest of this. If CNN is allowed to maintain its press access anywhere in DC, there needs to be a serious overhaul of our entire system. Even if CNN isn't allowed, there still needs to be a serious overhaul of our entire system. We are being run by big tech. Big tech is Big Brother. Big tech is Big Brother. And they are calling the shots in government, in mainstream media, in international affairs right now. And their power is hasn't reached its zenith yet. They're second, as I spoke about earlier in an earlier podcast, this is the beginning of their second financial coup in the world. As the World Economic Forum executes its Great Reset, this will be higher taxes. They've said it straight out. Higher taxes for taxpayers in the first world, in the Western world. That money will be transferred to the third world, but not just anywhere in the third world. It's going to be transferred to the very companies that these elites, like Amazon's Bezos, Bill Gates, and Jack Dorsey, who have already invested in the third world. That's where that intended extra tax money is coming from. That is their second global financial coup. Their power will be so enormous that no one anywhere in this world will be safe. This is World War III, as I recently tweeted. World War III doesn't require bullets and guns. They cancel you from the culture. They make it impossible for you to get bank accounts and credit cards. They make it impossible for you to get jobs. They make it impossible for you to contribute on social media. To the modern world, such a canceled person is, in fact, in a meaningful way, already dead. They are killing you, and they intend to kill more of us. Let's read on. This breaking. I trapped this up here because I was always bothered by all the CNN news nonstop. Everywhere you looked, in every airport, you were programmed like Big Brother, throwing the Big Brother message out at you. You can't shut it off. They have it on high volume everywhere. And when you look around those airports, what do you see? All these NPCs looking at the news, absorbing it, believing it. CNN at all these airport news stations has been programming the public for 30 years of crap, as you mentioned here. They will end operations on March 31st. This is not a coincidence in my mind. Not in the slightest. Having those contracts for those CNN news in those airports must have cost CNN a fortune. But it was an investment for them. It was one of the things that got them and the elite leftists to this point. The reason why they are cutting that out of their budget now is because they have achieved their goal. They no longer need those non-stop news shooting into the airports, the non-stop brainwashing, the non-stop elevating of their narratives. Furthermore, they also know that regular people, the ones they want brainwashed, are not going to be doing near as much traveling in the future. Why brainwash in airports when the people you want to brainwash are not going to be there anymore? Only the wealthy and the semi-wealthy and the people who support and enable the wealthy are going to be able to travel as they tax the crap out of people in the West and transfer that money to their companies in the third world. CNN has declared mission accomplished. The masses in the first world have now been brainwashed, and now they're going to take away their ability to travel. At least obviously some people are going to still be able to travel, but what's coming is the economic devastation of the West. The middle class is going to be gone. You're going to be crushed. You're going to be crushed under taxation and government programs and transfers to the third world. You're going to be crushed under their climate change plan to reorganize all of the world's energy uses around these so-called sustainable sources. The oil is going to be preserved for use by the elite and serve the purposes of the elite. Let's carry on here. Okay, that was the first section. Now this is the response I regularly get when I complain about these things or comment on the carryings on going on. I engaged in a conversation with Thunderfoot on Twitter, and of course I was dismissed as a quackpot, and this is the kind of thing, and I have resigned myself. I am going to be called a crackpot, a tinfoil hat, a conspiracy theorist, even if I just repost and comment on proven events. Reading from the top. As a right-wing tinfoil enthusiast, you wouldn't know the difference between a conspiracy and a business wanting to make money. Keep on crying about how big tech is out to get you. It's hilarious. I don't know how these kinds of people, like Shane Phillips here, I don't know how they can justify the deplatforming. I don't know how they cannot see that the monopolies in the social media, which have become the global public square, how they can accept the deplatforming on the basis that it's a private business. Rex Murphy spoke about this 2 days ago. I spoke about his article in the National Post. And again, I will constantly remind people to subscribe to everything that Rex Murphy does. He's brilliant, he's incisive, and he's an entertaining writer as well. And I'm going to be going over his article from yesterday here today because it applies to this exact thing. Rex Murphy is sounding the alarm in no uncertain terms that this is a great purge. We are entering the age of unpersoning, canceling in a serious, serious way. Of course, you all know that canceling started on university campuses a decade ago or more. We've been talking about that topic on Studio Brule for the last 8 years. But this is different. Taking the I should say the difference today is that it's off campus. This is everywhere in our culture. This is your canceling in jobs, canceling in your monitoring your PayPal for your social media to see if you can continue using PayPal. They are canceling you in the public square. This is far off of university campuses, which are dominated by left-wing zealots and brainwashed university students full of energy, thinking that they're going to bring in a utopia with a socialist world. Universities are a special case, a special incubator of insanity. And so we kind of understood it going on there at first, but it has spread, like everything else that begins in the so-called intellectual community. They don't deserve that term today. University system is complete crap now. But they do, the bulk of the public, the overwhelming majority of public, still takes and accepts stuff that comes from universities as authoritative. That is really, really wrong today. Universities are not authoritative on anything except possible sciences. I'm going to just pause here for a minute and thank Oklahoma Bachelor for his generous contribution to Studio Burley. SB sent me to DR to find a wife. T sent me to Capitol. Okay, cool. The Trump's Capitol influence was really about his speech, and Trump emphasized peaceful exercising of your patriotism, not insurrection. So, on we go here. This is in Forbes magazine. The date here, 2021, January 12th, 3 days ago. Twitter has removed more than 70,000 accounts linked to QAnon conspiracy since Capitol riots. And you know darn well, as well as I do, that those accounts aren't all just linked to QAnon. And what difference does it make if they are linked to QAnon? Are they canceling flat earthers? No. They're not canceling people who subscribe to the flat earth theory, even though that is far more conspiracy oriented than the QAnon stuff. And I'm not going to comment on QAnon because I don't follow it. I suspect there's a mix of everything in there. There's some commentary on actual reasonable commentary and suspicions around QAnon, and some of their claims may be true. Some of them may be exaggerated. But that is not a reason to suspend 70,000 accounts in one go. And this is just the beginning, folks. Just the beginning. Let's read from the top here, from that article. More than 70,000 Twitter accounts linked to the far-right QAnon conspiracy movement. Of course, they're always going to throw out conspiracy when they talk about right-wing stuff. They're going to try and discredit anything they say by calling them conspiracy theorists. That I talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think, when we discussed this, how the CIA created the term conspiracy theory for that exact purpose, to cast doubt on their critics in 1967. Let's carry on here, reading. Banned from the platform following riots at the Capitol last week. The company announced Monday as part of a wider crackdown on conspiracies. There they are, they're admitting it right here, folks. This 70,000 accounts is only a part of a wider crackdown on conspiracies. And remember, conspiracies is anything that criticizes or reveals what's going on in the mainstream media and the government and in our culture. They're using the CIA trick. Misinformation, again, misinformation. Look at our experience with COVID-19. The official recommendations flipped virtually 180 degrees several times in the first 2 months. Which one of those flips was the misinformation, and why was the World Health Organization and the CDC not considered for banning due to misinformation? Because they were both putting out misinformation for months. In fact, they still are putting out misinformation. So this is not about what they say. This is about targeting their critics, targeting the right, and helping to usher in the left-wing global one-world government. Attempts to incite violence, organize attacks, we saw that. Trump has been deplatformed on this, and he didn't even try to incite violence. That was a false flag. It's CNN themselves inciting violence, organizing attacks, and share deliberately misleading information about the election outcome. Misinformation like it was stolen. And we got I got a update on that. There was a woman arrested in Texas just recently for, you got it, participating in election fraud. And yet CNN persists with calling it deliberately misleading information about the election outcome. That has seen President Donald Trump and his high-profile supporters permanently blocked from the platform over fears he will use it to incite violence. Now, look at that very last statement. Over fears that he will use it to incite violence. In other words, they haven't done anything. This is thought crime, folks. This idea over fears that he will use it to incite violence. They can use that same reasoning to deplatform anyone. They just have to say, I'm afraid they might incite violence. And it worked this time, it will work next time, and every single time they use that argument. Because you can claim to be afraid that someone or some group is going to use their platform to incite violence. Anyone. Absolutely anyone, anytime, even if there is no previous evidence that they had even one single aggressive bone in their body. We are truly entering into the most dystopian form of oppression and freedom of speech and canceling in the history of humanity. Entirely on the basis of protecting us and ushering in the one world government utopia. I'm going to just pause in these things for 1 second here. Let me just check the next one going forward. Yeah, I'm going to just pause here for a second. This Great Purge precedes the Great Reset for a reason, a very good reason that the Purge precedes it. The Great Purge is to soften us and prepare us to accept the coming Great Reset, folks. It prepares us. Now, its purpose is to frighten the masses into silence. It is characterized by the cancellation and unpersoning of anyone who played a role in the Trump presidency or his re-election campaign. And we're going to go over in detail an example of that today in a few minutes. They have started with the big players, but the cancer is quickly spreading to much, much smaller fish. And our example is going to show that. And it's going to get to smaller fish than this example very, very, very quickly. I've been warning people recently to protect yourself, your career, and your money, because no one knows how broad and how deep the tyrannical leftist unpersoning and canceling campaign will go. Early evidence is that it will go very, very broad and involve not just social media, but jobs, careers, payment and purchase services like PayPal and Amazon, and even the banks have already gotten involved in canceling Trump, a German bank. So the case we're going to deal with in a minute or two is Dawson Buchanan. I don't know if you've heard of him yet, but he lost his job because he worked on the Trump campaign. Not a high-flying player, not a powerful person, just a 25-year-old guy who had the opportunity to work on a presidential campaign. What 25-year-old person working in public relations and media is going to turn down the opportunity to work on a presidential election campaign? This is an incredible opportunity for that guy. And because he did it, and because the left wants to cancel everything due to Trump, he was denied or fired from an opportunity that we'll get into the details on. Only because of his association with Trump. This is unconscionable, absolutely unconscionable. So for some reason my thing here is locked up again. I'm going to have to start that up anew. Where was I at? Okay, what did I just get through here? And I'm sorry for the delay, folks. I seem to have sometimes the screen won't advance to the next slide. It just stops working, and I don't know why. I have to just start over again. So here was the last screen we were at. And let's go to the next one. In this tweet, clearly Amazon intends to censor and dictate policy at every company that uses AWS. The arrogance and overreach is appalling, even in this age of arrogance and overreach. This is the reference to Parler being kicked off of the Amazon Web Services. Parler was, Amazon tried to dictate to Parler what it could do on its site. Amazon has therefore taken the role of lawmaker, judge, jury, and enforcer when it comes to speech. That is unprecedented. Just think of that for a second, folks. Amazon, a private company seeking globalism, has taken the role, by force, of lawmaker of the speech that a client can use on their own websites because it's hosted on their server. They've judged it, they've juried it, and they sentenced them to execution. The kicking off, the permanent banning of Parler from Amazon Web Service is, in metaphor, an execution of Parler. It's a death sentence. This is what Amazon sees the power they have in their hands. And with the Democratic Party in power, there is going to be absolutely zero will to do the right thing about this, which is to rein in Amazon, break it up, punish them for this kinds of overreach of power. They're not going to do it, though. The Democrats are part of that. In fact, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook are telling the Democrat Party what to do, not vice versa. Let's move on. Here, as Relevant points out, even the president of Mexico warns of Silicon Valley becoming a censorship court like the Holy Inquisition. This is exactly what's going on. That is, Mexico is worried about this. France, I think it was the government of France and the government of Germany, Merkel, even expressed her dismay at Trump being displatformed. But this is not going to stop these elites. Merkel doesn't, well, maybe she realizes, but she's just not quite accepted that Jeff Bezos, Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, they all have way more power than she does or ever even could dream of. Let's read on. Maxime Bernier, a politician in Canada trying to start up the People's Party of Canada as an alternative to the Conservatives, who have now really just become sycophantic liberal lights. That's our Conservative Party in Canada, but Maxime Bernier is a true Conservative. Didn't have much success, but he's doing his best. Read what he has to say. Another courageous Ontario member of Parliament, provincial Parliament, Roman Baber, is being kicked out of his party for telling the truth about the deadly consequences of lockdowns. No one in politics or in media can claim to not be aware of the deadly nature of these lockdowns. They are made decisions that are killing the citizens, and they know it. And when a member of Parliament tries to point it out, they kick him out of the party. The reason this is going on, folks, the reason of this is going on is clear. These globalists around the world, the super powerful elite, are telling all of the governments of the Western world what to do. These are not elected officials anymore. These are puppets. Each of the provincial premiers, the Prime Minister of Canada, our tiny tyrant Trudeau, the Democratic Party of the U.S., Harris and Biden, they are all puppets. None of them have anywhere near the power of the global elites. Not even close. How long, it says, before the elite consensus on these authoritarian and inefficient measures unravels? It's not going to unravel. The elite will end it when they've served their purpose and they no longer need the populace locked down. That is the point. They need to prevent regular people from organizing, going about their lives. They need to punish them, to make them dependent on government handouts after the economy is destroyed. They are not going to, they're not going to stop. This is Roman Barber's words. I was removed from the Ontario PC Party caucus. It's a regretful decision since many colleagues agree with me, including at Ford Nation in large part. I don't regret speaking out for the millions of lives and livelihoods decimated by public health. I serve the public. Folks like this are putting their necks out there. We should be supporting them. Folks like this are candidates for cancelling, for unpersoning in our culture. We should be supporting these politicians who are speaking out. And here, in the midst of CNN continuing its narrative that there is no evidence of election fraud, that people who say there's election fraud need to be silenced and kicked off public media, social media. Here, despite that, here we have breaking. Texas election official. This is a Texas election official, an employee with power in the election process. Exposed in the Project Veritas video, he was arrested for widespread vote harvesting and fraud. And she is not acting alone. This is where the critics will try to say, well, that's one person. It's not just one person. It's a person in the system with power, widespread voter harvesting and fraud in Texas. That is just one example. There are tons and tons of other examples, and by the time it all comes out, it will be too late. And the mainstream media is going to crush it. They're going to unperson and crush everybody who's trying to bring this information to the surface. They've already said as much. Here, a tweet I put out recently, just yesterday. Why is it that all of the leftists want to crush freedom of speech? We know why. They want the power to silence their critics as they eliminate your freedoms. Let's have a look at the article. This is an article in the Sun, the Toronto Sun, written by Laurie Goldstein. Trudeau wants to turn back the clock on free speech by targeting speech that offends liberals. Trudeau is truly the only true tyrant leader that Canada has ever seen. And he is a full-blown, full-scale, committed tyrant who has, in years past, while as a politician, has said that he envies China's basic dictatorship. And he could teach China a thing or two on how to dictate and oppress the people in the country. Trudeau is a full-blown tyrant, dictator. Let's read what the article says here. We intend, and this is a quote here that the writer was writing, we intend a comprehensive approach with the tabling of a bill in early 2021 that will apply to the various platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, according to a briefing note from his department on regulation of social media platforms, to promote, quote, promote a safer and more inclusive online environment. That's code for deplatforming anyone who disagrees with us. Deplatforming opposition. Reading the second paragraph with me. Social media platforms, it continues, can be used to threaten, intimidate, bully, and harass people, or used to promote racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, misogynistic, and homophobic views that target communities. But people's safety is at risk and put people's safety at risk and undermine Canada's social cohesion and democracy. Notice that word safety. Safety is the holy grail, the touchstone to justify any and every elimination of freedom. They will always use it. In the name of your safety, you must not leave your house. Does that ring a bell? In the name of your safety, you cannot walk the streets. In the name of your safety, you cannot sit on a beach alone. You have to be in your house. In the name of safety, you can't go for a jog outside. That's actually done in California. In the name of safety, your safety, in California, you can't go for a walk outside. Los Angeles. I don't know if that restriction is still on, but it was out there for a while. Safety, the concept of safety is a terrible, terrible concept when used by the left to justify elimination of your freedoms. The implication is that there is a perfectly safe world if only we can get there. You can't get there. All safety, virtually, all safety comes with a restriction of freedom. Perfect safety comes with total restriction, total elimination of your freedom. That's the direction of the left, using safety as the justification. Let's read on. As a liberal MP wisely said in May 2019, that's almost 2 years ago now, freedom of speech is so fundamental to our democracies that we recognize the solution doesn't lie in government's heavy hand over our internet, over our public spaces. That was a Liberal MP in May 2 years ago, almost. The Liberal MP was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who said he would only consider such legislation as a last resort. And look at him today. We are entering full-blown elimination of freedom of speech. Reading from the top, from that same article. Given that we already have criminal and civil laws to deal with these issues, and we do in Canada, they're quite strong even. People have been imprisoned for questioning the Holocaust in Canada, and that goes back 2 decades or more, possibly. We have laws to deal with all of these issues in Canada through the courts, with due process. Reading onwards, it appears what the Liberals really want to target is speech they think, quote, undermines Canada's long-standing commitment to diversity. That's the Liberal Party's version of diversity. That is, speech that offends liberals. Imagine being a opponent of the Liberals and then looking at some of their overreach on this whole topic of diversity, criticizing it. Well, suddenly, you are undermining Canada, quote, which is the Liberal Party's long-standing commitment to diversity, and you're subject to cancelling and to criminal prosecution. This is the world we are entering into today, folks. This, right here, is tiny tyrant Trudeau, whom the Chinese, who actually don't respect Trudeau, Trudeau is nothing but a useful idiot to the Chinese. They called him the little potato. Trudeau sees himself as a giant on the global scene, seeking a position amongst the elite in the one world government. That is why Trudeau is sold out Canada. That is why Trudeau is crafting his own little domain of dictatorship in Canada. He is a sycophant to the elite, and he sees himself among their numbers, ruling as an emperor in the world. This is the face of a tyrant, and he runs Canada. This is the guy, in the beginning of the pandemic, tried to take 100% personal control of the entire country's budget for 20 months. Fortunately, even his strongest allies in the NDP is a socialist party, even the Socialist Party of the NDP, which sees totalitarian government as an ideal goal, they didn't support that. But he did achieve 6 months of totalitarian control of Canada's government budget. And in that 6 months, Canada's deficit went from something like, I can't remember the numbers, but some few billion to almost $100 billion. Okay, let's put that in perspective to the U.S. This is the deficit. This isn't the debt. This is the deficit alone. That deficit accumulates that amount every single year until it's dealt with. So that is, if you compare that to the size of the country of the U.S., that would be $1 trillion per year deficit if it was in the U.S. For Canada, that is huge. This will be paid for many generations. Let's look forward. Here, the Business Insider. Facebook suspends Trump until the end of his presidency, January 7th. They did not wait one full day to suspend Trump. No charges laid against Trump. No evidence raised to support the decision. No trial, no jury, no nothing. Instant suspense. The Democrats got straight at work at justifying their impeachment, which I suspect was already prepared. They knew this was happening. They used that their own generated insurrection to justify the attack and total destruction of Trump. The unpersoning and canceling of Trump. It's despicable what's going on today. And this is going right across the world in every essential service. PayPal blocks site that helped raise funds for those who attended U.S. Capitol violence. Now let's remind ourselves here. Trump had a speech, gave a speech to his supporters. The funds were not to attend U.S. Capitol violence, but to attend Trump's speech. January 11th. This has come so fast and so furious, it's incredible. It is like a concerted effort that executed like a military plan. Washington Post, Amazon suspends Parler, you know about this, taking pro-Trump site offline indefinitely. The Deutsche Bank joins companies cutting ties with Donald Trump. Bank had propped up Trump Organization for years despite being sued by president, but acted after Capitol attack. The Capitol attack used to justify eliminating Trump's access to this particular bank. The attack that was organized and incited by CNN and Antifa leftists, probably with the knowledge of the Democrats. This is a scam. It's a coup. It's a setup. A false flag attack. And this is just beginning, folks. These people are absolutely intent on taking total control of the world. I highly suggest, if you want to know details of how this is happening and why, take a look at the video I published 2-3 months ago called Feminism's Role in a One World Government and What We Can Do About It. Feminism plays a huge, huge role in this. I suggest that if you are interested in that, watch that particular video. Now here we have Twitter suspends accounts of Michael Flynn and Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell, a lawyer who dared to defend Trump and work on the case. It's perfectly legal to start a case to question the legality or the fraud of the election. There's nothing illegal in the U.S. about filing a case and working on it. And yet, Sidney Powell, one of the lawyers who worked on with Rudy Giuliani, has her Twitter account suspended. This is just the beginning of the unpersoning. Here, folks, this is what I just tweeted out before the show here today. World War III has started. The elite tyrants have no need of guns and bullets. They kill their opponents by cancelling them. Kicked out of the public square, banned from purchasing and payment systems, and made ineligible for jobs, these people are effectively dead to the modern world. This is not an exaggeration. Try to imagine how you would run your life, how would you manage your life in this world if you couldn't get a job, the bank closed your bank account, you can't get a credit card, you're not allowed to participate on Amazon or Public Square, you're not allowed you have no voice to even get it out to the public in Twitter or Facebook, you've been canceled. The mainstream media is all run by leftists. They're not going to talk about the injustice done to you. Where are you going to go? How are you going to survive? This is how the left elites are conducting or opening salvos, the opening shots in World War III. They control all of those things now. Let's move on to the next stage of our this today. Okay, now this is the, yeah. Oops, that's not the one I wanted to go to yet. I'm going to have to back up a second here. Yeah. So, this is the fellow, Dawson Buchanan. We're going to talk about him for a few minutes. He was a guy who lost his job, 25 years old, had an opportunity to work on the Trump re-election campaign. He works that's his chosen field and chosen career. What 25-year-old would say, no, I'm not going to take a job in the highest profile opportunity in my field today? This is a golden opportunity. You can't fault this guy for taking that opportunity, even if he was not a Trump supporter. Of course, they wouldn't have hired him if he wasn't a Trump supporter, but that's not the point. Let's move on ahead. This is back in December 24th, 2020. Buchanan played a key role in President's re-election effort. Let's expand this a bit for you. Here in that same article, in the midst of one of the most heated election seasons in recent memory, Avery County native Dawson Buchanan found himself right in the middle of the political fervor. As a part of President Donald Trump's re-election campaign team, Buchanan played a vital role in conducting and coordinating many of the president's rallies, thus helping the Trump train roll into cities across the country. Good for him. I guess he's good at his job. Buchanan began working for the campaign in the fall of 2019. 2019, that's a year and a half ago, and found himself fulfilling the role as contract coordinator. Now, here, this is the fellow who was kicked out of his job. And this printed January 14th, yesterday. Did the NHL push a New Hampshire jet charter company to fire an ex-Trump campaign worker? I want to get this out front before we get into the details here. Dawson Buchanan was excited about the start of the NHL's new season and the chance to be a part of team travel for the Carolina Hurricanes. That opportunity ended early this week, he said, when he was called by Private Jet Services, his employer, which is handling charter flights for NHL teams such as the Hurricanes, and informed he was being fired as a travel concierge because of his work in Donald Trump's presidential campaign. This is the net of cancellation that is being spread very quickly, widening to include smaller and smaller fish in the whole thing. Pause here for a second to recognize Ziranks. Thank you so much for your support of Studio Brûlée. And Ziranks says, and some wonder why others maintain anonymity on social media. I absolutely can't think of a reasonable response. And I agree with you, Xeranx. If you're a young man beginning your career, you've got to be extraordinarily careful, because it'll be an awful long and hard life if you haven't built up some resources in a career before you start putting your neck out in the line. People ask me about this sometimes, like, am I at risk of being canceled, or am I afraid of it, and all blah, blah, blah. It's a concern. I do not want to be canceled. Who does? Nobody wants to be canceled. I like having access to and participating in the public conversation. I like making a little money to pay my bills. But I'm 61 now, and I started this when I was 53 or so publicly, in a time where it wasn't dangerous to criticize the left. 2012, it wasn't dangerous. In fact, YouTube supported, made decisions on my side to support the work I was putting out in those first few years. It wasn't until 2017 or 2018, I think, when YouTube flipped and started demonetizing everything. They put in their feminist CEO, I don't remember her name, but suddenly and quickly, YouTube swung over, as did all the major tech companies, and now they're fully attacking anyone who criticizes the left. So it's a concern, but not so much for me, because I am past that. There's no way I'm ever working again in my original career field. And even if they do cancel me, I will probably still be able to survive the remaining decade or two of my life. It's not like I'm 25 or so. That's a lot harder to do from 25 out. I'm 60-something. Probably sometime in my 70s or early 80s, I won't even know where I am. So what will it really matter? That's the reality of life. It's easier to stick your neck out when you get to your later phase of life. But let's move on here. The NHL, and this is just to get this out here too, the NHL Carolina Hurricanes deny having a hand in ex-Trump staffer's claimed firing. He wasn't claimed firing, he's a real firing. The question really is that did the NHL actually was it their insistence that he was fired? Just a quick question from Wikipedia snippet. You were a chemist like Thunderfoot. Yes, that's right. Thunderfoot, though, I think has gone completely far left wing. He's a very vocal and active and cynical critic of the right. So that's a bit disturbing to me. I was a chemist and I worked for Dow Chemical and DuPont, a total of 22 years. I got into database programming and process control programming, writing code to control the chemical plants. And after the database experience, I got contracts and moved with the federal government in 2 different departments doing database work. That's all behind me now. The field has moved on and my experience is now stale. I now am what you see. And it's actually enjoy this work a lot more than any of the other work I've ever done, because I am speaking my mind. That's really kind of a empowering thing to do. Let's hope it can continue on for some time yet. I'm engaged in the social process, and this is why it really upsets me when they cancel people from the public square, because being involved in the public conversation, in whatever manner, either big or small, is a very deeply satisfying and important human thing. It is part of your connection to other people in the world. It's part of it's similar to connections people in your real life. You're not as intimate with people online, obviously, but it is the human connection. Kicking people out of the public square can be devastating to some. Some will commit suicide just for being kicked out of the public square alone. So these leftists, these elitists, they know all of this. They pretend to have such sensitivity to their lefty employees. They know that banning somebody from the public square could kill them. But they're going to do it anywhere because this is World War III. So let's carry on a little bit here. Reading from the top. The NHL and Carolina Hurricanes deny that they pressured the private airline company to fire a former campaign staffer for President Trump. Dawson Buchanan, a travel coordinator for Trump's election campaign, claimed in a Twitter thread on Thursday that he was fired by PJS, the public private jet service, when the NHL found out that I worked for the Trump campaign and threatened to cancel the contract with PJS unless they fired me. Okay, he may be reading too much into this incident, but the fact remains he was fired because of his connection with Trump. And when the push comes to shove, that's what matters. Whether the decision was made by PJS out of paranoid fear of the left, which it might be. This is how these kinds of cancers spread. The fear spreads. There may be somebody in PJS, in their human resources department, that thought, oh, you know something? He worked for Trump. In this environment, we can't afford to appear to be supporting people who work for Trump. This will spread from company to company, and this kind of cancer can spread very, very fast. So in a sense, it doesn't matter if NHL gave the order or PJS themselves decided that it was too risky to have a Trump supporter on board. The fact is, they're unpersoning. Let's carry on. And Dawson says, thank you, Todd James, for helping me tell my story. It's time to cancel the cancel culture. Yes, that's true. And Dawson Buchanan is getting quite a lot of attention now. I think he was interviewed on Fox News and some other sites. Might try to get him on Studio Burley to talk about his experience as well. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. Reading from the top. Dawson says, it was a pleasure to join Shannon Bream last night on Fox News. I'm thankful to share my experience and take a stand against cancel culture. We need a lot more Dawsons. And as I just recently said, and I believe, the fact is that young people like Dawson of 25 years old are taking a much, much greater risk than people in my age group. It's still a risk. But if you're late in your career, folks, I encourage you guys who are of my age or similar to speak out, speak out, speak out, speak out. Yes, it's a risk. Absolutely, it's a risk. But us speaking out may help the younger generations in being protected. Us being silent certainly hurts them. It certainly hurts the culture, and it helps the globalist elite leftists bring in their totalitarian one-world government. It is up to my generation, the people who are towards the end of their career or retired, to get involved with this conversation. This is a global problem. It is a global tyranny. And it's going to destroy the lives of millions of young men in particular. For us, yeah, I don't want to be canceled, you don't want to be canceled, but at our age, we're the ones who need to lead the voices. Don't lay this on the shoulders of 25-year-old guys who have a 40 years of work life to build ahead of them. So, let's move forward here. The next the next thing I'm going to get into is Dawson's actual story, in his own words. This is Dawson Buchanan's Twitter stream after he was fired on Twitter. Reading from the top with me. A couple of hours ago, I tweeted out that this tweet referred to me. Shortly after, I deleted that tweet after much introspection and talking with friends and family. I feel obligated to reveal why I deleted it. After identifying myself as the subject of the thread, he was talking about his firing at PJS, Fly PJS reached out to me, threatening to take legal action and publicly defame me if I didn't delete the tweet. He criticized PJS for firing him for being connected to Trump. And PJS tried to intimidate him into silence. I give this young fellow a lot of credit for having the nerve to stand up to a big organization like PJS and the NHL and the whole elite leftists. Intimidated and nervous I immediately deleted it. I can't blame him for that. But what he did next is far more important. But after thinking about it and discussing my rights of free speech with advisors, I will not be bullied into silence. I'm now going to raise my voice louder. Reading from the top. In early January, PJS hired me to be a concierge for a contract they had with the NHL team at Canes. Having worked with PJS as an operations associate for Trump Campaign HQ, I eagerly accepted the position, excited to join a company I have developed a personal relationship with. So PJS also served the Trump campaign. But now that the Trump campaign lost, PJS wants to erase history, their own history of having worked for Trump. PJS saw that their future business lies with the left, the cowards. Reading from the top. After receiving a laptop, establishing a work email, and even purchasing additional work clothes, I prepared to travel to Raleigh, North Carolina today for training. Yesterday evening, around 7 p.m., PJS called and fired me without explanation. On pretty good ground suspecting that PJS was warned by the NHL. Here's reading from the top. I was devastated. I had gone from being employed to unemployed in a matter of seconds, and I hadn't done anything wrong. Reading on. I called the owner of PJS and asked for an explanation. He told me very bluntly, the NHL found out I worked for the Trump campaign and threatened to cancel the contract with PJS unless they fired me. Does this ring true to you? This absolutely, in every single way, mirrors all the rest of the stuff that's going on in our culture. This rings 1,000% true to me. Look at the entire NFL, how they bowed to BLM and started taking knees, how they bowed to feminist pressure, all of these organizations, they are bowing to the leftists. The NHL, this absolutely rings true. I have no reason to suspect Dawson Buchanan's claims, but I have a lot of reasons to suspect the NHL, the NFL, and every giant corporation in the U.S. and around the world. They have given us mountains upon mountains of legitimate reasons to suspect their motives. Let's read on. I was upset and disappointed, but I didn't initially blame them for this decision. I wish they had stood up for me. They didn't. I didn't have any animosity towards PJS until they tried to bully me into silence. Good for you, Dawson. Dawson has a spine. He would have remained, just accepted his situation, having vented his side of the story quietly on Twitter, not getting much attention. But then they threatened him with legal action. He immediately took it down, but then he thought better and decided he's going to grow a spine and stand up to these unconscionable actions of the bullies. PJS is the bully. NHL is the bigger bully behind the PJS bully. And these are the people we all have to start standing up to. And we have to be supporting people like Dawson Buchanan, who is putting his entire lifetime career on the line by speaking out. His entire lifetime career. He's 25 years old. Good for you, Dawson. You're a shining example for the rest of us. So now I'm sharing the story, he says, in its entirety, even though the owner told me this afternoon that he would deny everything I say if this went any further. And of course, the NHL is going to deny it too. You and I have to decide who is more credible. The NHL is not going to be honest and admit that they told PJS to fire this guy. They will never, ever, ever admit that. PJS is never going to admit that either. The question is, how did a guy go from being the best candidate for the job one day, sent equipment, scheduled for training, then without question, without warning, fired instantly the next day. What could explain that? Nothing can explain that better than the fact that the NHL told them to do it. And PJS did it. That's the line of command of the lefty losers. Well, they're not losers right now. They're winning. They're taking over the entire world. But the NHL is a pawn to the elite globalists, because the elite globalists are funding and they're manipulating our entire culture. They have the ability through the MSM to whip up Antifa and BLM and to destroy even organizations like the NHL. It's the people like us who have to now start boycotting the NHL. We can't give them $1. Boycott all of these sports teams. They're not worth it anymore. Sports leagues. Whoops, I didn't finish that whole thing here. Let's just read the last bit of this. Even the owner told me this afternoon that he would deny everything I said in the story if I went further. But this is the truth, and I feel more empowered and supported if I share it with all of you. This is an important statement here, folks. It reveals that this kid at 25 years old, he gets it. Look, the truth is empowering. Even if you face Goliath, the standing up for the truth is empowering. And you will be, this is a message for all of us, you will be supported by surprising people if you do stand up and speak the truth. You may also suffer some pain, there's no question about it, but you will also find support. Now this is blocked on me again here. I'm going to have to start this over. Once again, it's seized up, and I don't know why it does that. So, that was number 10. Let's get to this one over here. The next slide. I can't begin to thank all of the people who helped me through this and have reached out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and by email to help. Thank you all so much. I look forward to continuing to voice the truth so this never happens to a conservative again. It shouldn't happen to anyone. Let's be clear, folks. Whether it's cancellation of our leftist lunatic enemies, or cancellation of moderate people, or cancellation of people who spew something you might think of as hateful, or cancellation of the right. It's the cancellation. It's the silencing of freedom of speech. It's the unpersoning that's the problem here. We cannot tolerate this. What's going on today can bring any one of us under attack, and anyone that you know and love. It shouldn't happen to anyone. Reading onwards here. Now this is some of the response online to this fellow. And Rubin report, Dave Rubin was the one who first brought this to my attention. He was at the riots, which he very much claimed to not be. Well, first of all, he was not at the riots, he was at a speech, a Trump speech. And there's absolutely no evidence that this guy was doing anything illegal. But this is the problem with the left today. They are unpersoning people without due process, without charge, just on the suspicion that they might be up to something. Dawson Buchanan, all he said on December 30th was that, "See you there, Mr. President." In other words, see you at Trump's speech. Why is it that these left think that going to see a speech of the President of the U.S. should be grounds for unpersoning? The guy attended a speech. That's his crime. This is the kind of cancerous fear that the left is spreading and creating throughout our culture. It's all about keeping you afraid to oppose or even criticize the tyranny. This guy says it's called the marketplace of ideas and marketplaces rejecting Trumpism, David. Also, what state? Was it at will employment? Well, it doesn't matter. He was ordered fired because of the optics of having worked for Trump. The fact that so many people in our culture defend his firing is absolutely amazing to me. It is a sign that the people of the U.S. are the useful idiots. They will police each other. They will voluntarily and freely become the police for the shutting down of freedoms and rights on behalf of the elite. The elite got the fear going, and the public, the masses in the public, are obeying. And they're going to go out and they're going to try to act like good little comrades to support the elite's actions. We're seeing this terrifyingly often throughout the social media. And this guy said, "I'm amazed at the number of comments gleefully saying he deserved it. 25-year-old kid took the opportunity to work in a job of a lifetime, working on a presidential campaign of a sitting president, and he's punished for it by being unpersoned, and that large numbers of people in our society are celebrating it. They're celebrating it. And these are the same people who will say, 'I speak truth to power,' as they back up the most tyrannical regimes ever in the history of humanity and dump on a 25-year-old kid starting out his career. I'm reminding myself," it says here, "Twitter comments don't necessarily represent a good sample of society. Otherwise, the comments are disturbing." You're right. That is absolutely right. It's very disturbing. And here, this is a common sentiment. And notice that Dean Gloucester here has his face hidden for anonymity, probably, I don't know. Or maybe he just wants to telegraph that he's part of the Antifa bigots and tyrants. Reading from the top. "Dude, you worked for a violent fascist with contemptible values who killed more Americans than the last 4 wars combined." Where do they come up with this nonsense? "No one should hire you who is concerned about their public reputation." That's a point there. That is the problem, that the left have made it a concern for your public reputation. That is tyranny. That is oppression. And it's full blown in the Western world today. "I'd boycott any vendor I found had hired you. Take personal responsibility, Dillweed." So there you have it, folks. And this guy is far from alone. This cancerous sentiment is throughout our culture, and it's growing right around the world. Cancel anyone who worked for Trump. Cancel anyone who criticizes your leftist ideology. It's out there, folks. It's growing. It's powerful. This is the cancer of the one world government elites. They encourage this. They know what they're doing. Wow, every comment is lost, from at-will employment to prior work history. This young man was fired because of his political ideology. You are not American if this is what you want. Well, unfortunately, I disagree with you there. That is America today. Your president and vice president are part of that. The Democratic Party, who controls the country, is part of that. The elites who run and own the biggest corporations right across the U.S. and the world are part of that. You cannot say that this is not American now. America is tyranny now. You voted for it. The lefties work non-stop, violently, and behind the scenes for 4 years to bring this about. This is today's America. It's up to you folks who don't like it to change that. But you can't say this is not American. This absolutely is American now. It is the new USA. Freedom of speech and expression sound familiar. Well, and this guy, Matt Johnson, pulled out those same tweets saying that nothing illegal, nothing even controversial. Dawson Buchanan wants to go to the speech. Of course he wants to go to the speech. I mean, what do these guys think? He worked for the campaign. You think he's not going to go and listen to Trump's speech? It doesn't mean anything. It's exactly what you would expect this guy to do. And here, he said, corruption must be rooted out. No kidding. That is not a controversial statement. We all, on all sides of the spectrum, should be rooting out corruption. Only the lefties don't do that. The lefties create corruption. Let's move on. And this is a few more comments before I get to the all-important, insightful article by Rex Murphy. That's coming up in a couple of minutes. We're just going to read a couple of more quick comments related to Dawson Buchanan's case here. Reading from the top. On the bright side, in just 8 days, you'll have a president and Congress who will deliver additional economic relief, fight to raise the minimum wage, should you need to take an hourly job, and work to strengthen unions. As a union member, you wouldn't have been so easily fired. How naive. Blonde in Brooklyn. Well, I don't know. You're making the old blonde jokes sound pretty accurate about blondes. 8 days, a president and Congress who will deliver additional economic relief. They voted against $2,000 in favor of $600. They sent 70 or 80% of your defense budget to overseas foreign aid in a time when the huge numbers of American citizens are suffering greatly. Lost businesses, people committing suicide and into depression because of the decisions of the state governments to shut down economies. You seriously think Biden-Harris is going to help the people? You are far gone. You are very far gone. Here, another quote. Fascinating to see how many people are just fine with this as long as it punishes someone they don't like. That's exactly right. That's the problem. Someone they have never even met. This is how far the hysteria, the hatred, and anger has progressed amongst the left. Reading from the top. Let's see if I can give you something on your intellectual level to relate to. Watch A Few Good Men. The whole point was the guy was held responsible because he engaged in bad behavior and should have known better. There's consequences. Is that clear to you? Well, no one's engaged in bad behavior. What we have here, at best, no one on the right has engaged in the bad behavior. The right has been resisting the absolute tyranny, rioting, and violence and looting that the people on the left have been doing and encouraging and inciting for the entire Trump presidency. The entire Trump presidency. This is incredible. Let's read this one from the top. Here is a thread about a guy who worked on the Trump campaign and was fired from a new job at the NHL, but before he even started of his work, looks like cancel culture is going to be all the rage. Cancel culture has been with us, folks, in the university systems, as I mentioned earlier, for decades. And stuff that starts in the university systems, unfortunate as it is, the majority of the public takes the universities as credible, as thought leadership, as authoritative. That cancel culture is now spreading throughout our entire culture. This is how feminists started in the 1970s, getting into the universities. And then they started with their whole women's studies and gender studies programs and creating so-called studies and research that is totally, completely illegitimate, completely fake, worst studies in the world. And then those studies get printed in so-called journals, and politicians use it to as a justification to change law and public policy. That's how they get out there. Then you have feminists in the legal system, you have them in the government, you have them in the workplace. They've transformed our society, starting by getting the credibility of the university. They created their own programs, and their programs are all about regurgitating their ideology. This is what's happened with cancel culture. Cancel culture is now the cancer spreading all the way around the world. But let's move on. This is a terrible comment here. On the one hand, as a mother, I feel bad for you. But you made the decision to not just work about, but also enthusiastically support the most corrupt administration ever. Such a broad generalization. The hatred behind this comment is incredible. This makes your every action, thought, suspect. Character matters. Well, these are the little petty tyrants, the supporters. These are the useful idiots that are right through the U.S. right now. But Dean Gloucester again says, you chose to work for a serial sexual assaulter who spews racist invectives and tried to give that guy more power. No organization with ethics or decent values will ever want to hire you. You served evil and you create a liability risk working there. This is the insanity of the left. And David O'Brien says, I think this is the last one on this before we get to Rex Murphy. I'm a liberal Democrat, but I do think we should not let cancel culture take over. Liberals believe and forgive. Now I did respond to this guy on this, as this is incredible. How a liberal can think that like this. Liberals believe in forgiveness, second chances, and redemption. We also want to stop oppression, not create more of it. Even if Trumpism is the opposite of these values, let's be better. Look, folks, this guy must have been asleep for the last 6 years. Liberals believe in forgiveness, second chances, and redemption. That is utterly indefensible. The liberals have been on the attack, inciting violence and riots. They have put up epithets, or rather puppets of Trump and beat them to death. They have bloody heads of Trump. They have incited violence. They've encouraged Democrats. Francine Waters encouraged Democrats to seek out Republicans everywhere in the public square, not give them a piece and not a chance to even exist in restaurants, wherever you see them. She told her millions of Democrat supporters to harass and abuse every Republican. There is absolutely nothing forgiving or redemptive about the left today. They are the full-blown rise of totalitarian tyranny. There's no avoiding that conclusion now. Now let's move forward to the inimitable Rex Murphy's comments on this very topic. And as I keep saying, if you don't follow Rex Murphy, follow him. He is brilliant. National Post, published 2 days ago. Canada is in crisis. Aaron O'Toole, where are you? This refers to Canadian politics, but it's the same story in every Western country today. So it's worth going over this. This same story of the politicians in every Western country, and it's Rex is speaking of Canada, but it applies to all of us in every country. It is at times like these that parliamentary opposition, questioning, debating, remorselessly testing the government is most required. And what did we just see in the U.S. government? Even Republicans, blindly, without evidence, helped to push the impeachment of Trump forward. They helped to bury the evidence and the process for the fraudulent election, to bring it to courts. The right has become silent and afraid. They're not showing their faces. This is the world we live in today. It's not just the U.S., it's not just Canada. This is all around the world. It's all coming from the very elite, most powerful people in the world, in human history. Let's read what Rex has to say, at least some of it. I do encourage you to take the link in the description and read the full article. Let's read this quote. Just take the most recent events down south in the wake of the attack on the Capitol. I am referring to the most extravagant example of what we have come to call cancel culture. And I'm afraid to say, folks, it's just getting started. These kinds of tyrannical movements never go anywhere but more tyranny until they are crushed, until they have the cancer of the entire movement has corrupted and rotted from within so that the tower of power collapses. That is going to take a very, very long time. Prepare yourself for the acceleration of cancel culture. Read from the top. Excuse me. Take a sip of coffee here. Reading from the top. They demand the head of the heretic. Metaphorically, one hopes, but not really. You know that many of these leftists would take Trump's head. And whichever publishing house, university campus, or company houses the victim swiftly finds the need to blast him or her from their premises, apologize all over the place, and issue prayerful assurances that the campus, house, or company prizes above all the holy trinity of inclusion, diversity, and anti-bias. In end result, expulsion and ostracism for the offender, genuflection and penance for the weak-kneed institution. This is what's going on right through our culture with this cancel culture. But Rex should have used this term diversity, inclusion, and equity. The acronym DIE, which is DIE, which is metaphorically represents the direction that the left is pushing our whole culture. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. DIE. Janice Fiamengo did a great Fiamengo file on exactly this topic, probably a year or two ago. Look it up if you have the opportunity. Reading from the top. Not that cancel culture, no, the larger one. He was originally referring to the smaller episodes we've been seeing for years in universities for the most part, but also in companies and organizations that have a high profile to the public. The larger one, where the greatest companies the world has ever known, with an oligarchic power over the flow of information and communication in general, decide in concert to shut down a president. It was in concert. Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram, they all deplatformed Trump within hours or a day, in the same day. The same companies that then go on a full spree, overt and covert cancellation of all sorts of accounts and users, purging individuals and groups from their ranks. Twitter purged 70,000 accounts in one day. And Twitter CEO Jack admitted in his private secretly video recorded conversation that was just the start. That, folks, and this can't be overemphasized. This is just the start of this cancel culture. No one knows how deep or how broad it's going to go. Anyone who has not been enthusiastically supporting the left is subject to investigation and cancellation. This is enthusiastically. We earned this term from enthusiastic consent, yes, and how that for sexual relations with the feminists, and how that's been turned into an absolute attack on presumption of innocence for men at universities. This is the same thing. If you have not been enthusiastically in support of the left, you are at risk. I am at risk. Let's read on what Rex has to say. The tech oligarchs, rich beyond dreams, powerful beyond measure, accountable to nothing but their own untrammeled whims. They decide who may ride the information superhighway and who may not. That's where we're at. And that is how they are taking over the entire world. Reading from the top, the inimitable Rex Murphy. This is not emphatically an American issue. It would be nice to hear from Mr. O'Toole. So Rex was referring to the U.S. and those companies especially, but this is global. And O'Toole is the official opposition in the Canadian federal government, in the Parliament. His entire job, Mr. O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, his entire job is to question the Liberal government. And he's not doing it, even though Our current sitting Liberal government under tiny tyrant Trudeau only has a minority government. This is not a majority. In Canada, that means they do not have a secure agenda or a secure vote of the Canadian people. In these situations, usually the government is constantly under siege from the other parties of Canada, questioning their every move. But that's not happening today. This is really an important point that I want to emphasize. Why is it that a minority Liberal government under tiny tyrant Trudeau is not under siege, attacked by the other parties? They are all on board, and the little criticism they get is kit gloves from the official leader of the opposition. And the only strong criticism they get is from independent sitting members. This is very telling. This is telling of the tentacles of the elite reaching into the highest reaches of power of every country around the world. This is the World Economic Forum. This is the United Nations. This is the World Health Organization. This is Bill Gates. This is Bezos. This is Jack Dorsey. Those elite who are dictating and architects of the World Economic Forum Great Reset, where their tentacles go to the Prime Minister of Canada and all the leaders of their parties. Trudeau actually paraphrased the exact lines about climate change and wealth transfer to poorer countries that the World Economic Forum had written into their Great Reset. When he was called to task on it, the Trudeau government, in full Orwellian denial, just said they were conspiracy theories, even though Trudeau's own words were paraphrased very closely, and the meaning of his words were a repetition of the meaning of the content of the Great Reset of the World Economic Forum. Again, the World Economic Forum is controlled by the elite of the world. Those tentacles, that is their line of power to all of the high-level government officials of all of the countries in the world. This is a coup. It is a global coup. But let's read on for Rex Murphy. Sorry, I get a little bit distracted. I get passionate about this stuff. It would be nice to hear from Mr. O'Toole in the strongest voice he can bring to bear as opposition leader what he and his party feel about this, in my view, grand and frightening overreach. During his run for the leadership of the Conservative Party, he was fairly intense on the whole notion of cancel culture, quite declarative of his opposition to it. It's fair then to ask, when we have an example of cancel culture leaping up the scale to what amounts to high censorship, exercised simply fiat by a quartet of tycoons, why is he not out front condemning it? O'Toole, Aaron O'Toole. Did I say Peter O'Toole? I think that's an actor. But in any case, O'Toole is silent. You notice that there are very few world leaders that aren't silent about Trump's total cancellation by these elite tyrants. Only the President of Mexico, I think, and Merkel, oddly enough, Merkel expressed dismay and disappointment at this. And I think the President of France, there's one other country, European country, that also expressed this. But here, most of the leaders of the free world, the so-called free world, we can't call it the free world anymore. We just have to call it the Western world because it's not free in any remote shape of the word, any interpretation of the word free. Those days are gone. It was the days of freedom and prosperity for large numbers of human beings. They are coming to a close. We are entering in the elite-controlled one-world government phase of tyranny, and will wrap itself around the world, and with, I'm calling, the 1,000 years of darkness is what's starting. 1,000 years of darkness. 1,000 years merely representing a very long time. So we'll read on here. It's fair then to ask, when we have an example of cancel culture leaping up the scale, I read this whole thing, did I? Why is he not out front condemning it. Well, we know why. Because he's been told. He's afraid not only of the elites and the power they hold, but the elites have controlled and influenced the mentality of the citizens in Canada. Canadians are celebrating the destruction and loss of their own freedoms. That's what O'Toole is afraid about. He has no backbone. He has no principles of a conservative nature. He's afraid of the reality that Canadians support the incoming tyrants. And it's true. So do most Americans, I'm afraid. That's how they got here. Or proclaiming, this is such a great line. Why is he not out front condemning it? Or proclaiming, Google forbid, play on words, he's for it. This is exactly true. And Google very much is close to the power of God in our world today. And that's Rex's brilliant reference to that. Reading from the top, as wrapping up this article here very shortly. Just a couple of more quotes. But that's just the start. Here, purely on our own ground in Canada, we enter the second year of the COVID lockdowns. The second year, let that sink in, folks. The second year of 2 weeks to flatten the curve. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I am saying that we've gone from 2 weeks to flatten the curve to I'm going to write this in the comments. 2 years to destroy the will of the people. That's the phase of the lockdowns we're gone into now. We're entering into the second year. It's not for COVID lockdowns anymore. This is to destroy the will of the people. 2 years to destroy the will of the people. This is all part of and needed for their ushering in of their one world government and their globalism and their plan to transfer wealth from Western countries to the third world businesses owned by the elite in the third world countries. Reading from the top. Excuse me, got a little bit of coffee here. Rex continues, the highest questions of civil liberties in a time of emergency, perhaps the most significant debate we could ever have, are not being debated. Isn't that amazing, folks? Much smaller issues created uproar in Parliament before, and this, as Rex points out, the highest questions of civil liberties in a time of emergency are not being debated. Regimes imposed, information only reluctantly squeezed out of the authorities, people's movements, sometimes it seems almost randomly, subject to unprecedented government and police control. These are areas of the most profound significance. And as Rex Murphy points out, they are not even being questioned or debated in Parliament by the leader of the Conservative opposition. The guy, Aaron O'Toole, whose very job it is to raise these questions, is totally silent. He's an imposter. He's a sellout. He's frightened. He's not doing his job. He's lost his spine. Aaron O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Absent. But our opposition party, the constitutional instrument of challenge and debate, is off the field. The leader of the opposition is quiescent. They're not engaging the battle. And Rex says, and this wraps up his article, at least the quotes that I have from his article, it's longer than this. I cannot recall a time in which the opposing party in Parliament has been so limp and feeble. And that raises the question, why, folks? Why is the opposition so limp and feeble? There can be a lot of explanations. Number one, he's frightened. Cancel culture has made everyone frightened of opposing the leftist, elitist view. He's frightened, or he's on board, or he's been threatened by the elitists and their long tentacles of influence. But in any case, what we're seeing here is an unopposed rise to power of the elitists globally who intend and have stated this intention. I dealt with this in the One World Government, Feminism's Role in the One World Government. They have openly stated their intention to have a one world government. They've openly stated that since the 1920s. There was an organization prior to the United Nations, and the United Nations is the second version of this. I can't remember what it was called, but it's in the video. There's no opposition to the rise of the one world government. Trump was the one major actor in the world who was in opposition to globalism, who wanted to protect national borders and respect the national borders of other countries. This is an important part. A person like Trump, who wants to protect U.S. national borders, also respects the borders of other nations, all other nations. And that was borne out in the fact that Trump is the first president in living memory who did not start a war. He ended wars. He signed 5 peace agreements in the ending days of his presidency with Middle Eastern countries. With Israel. So, we now have the traitors, the globalists in power. We have Biden and Harris. Biden is in the pocket. He's an insider of the elitist circle of power. That's why they wanted him as president. That's why they even rigged the primary so Biden would be the leader of the candidate for the Democratic Party. Because they knew full well that they were going to rig this election. One way or another, the Democrats said they were going to get Trump out, no matter what, in their own words. Nothing, they said, was off the table. And obviously they meant that on a scale none of us ever imagined possible. And they mean it today. And they picked Harris, a most unlikely candidate for vice president. Why? Because they liked her absolute ruthless lack of conscience. Harris, who left possibly thousands of black men imprisoned, innocent black men imprisoned, and hid and suppressed expulsory evidence that would have set them free. Harris, who got to the top through using her sexuality, who was brutally and absolutely without conscience. They want her because that's the kind of person they need in the presidency of the U.S. to facilitate their elitist global coup of the entire world. These are the days we are entering into. These are the days that I am calling, and I'll write it into the description again. I'm calling the 1,000 years of darkness. It's just the start of the 1,000 years of darkness. So protect yourself. And that's all I have for today, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. If you can, please support Studio Brûlé through PayPal is a good venue, or through Patreon. We have an account on Patreon and an account on Subscribestar. I know a lot of people are upset with Patreon for having canceled Sargon of Akkad. I understand that. Patreon, though, still remains, and we tried to switch over to other funding means, but still remains our largest source of funding. But direct payments through PayPal work for us as well. And as I always remind everybody, Do something you love to do today, and do it every day. If you don't have something you love to do, find something you absolutely love to do. It's very nourishing for your soul. It's healthy for your mental health. This is your life. You're living it. It doesn't matter what's going on around you. Every single day, do something you love. I've mentioned before, I play and practice piano. I really get a lot of enjoyment out of that. It takes my mind off everything. And the other thing I do that I enjoy a lot is ride my motorcycle. It's the closest thing to flying and freedom that I experience. The two of those things, the music and the motorcycle, these keep me mentally healthy, and it's nourishing. So with that, don't forget to tune back in to Studio Brûlé next time.